So we spoke about pre-training and we were able to teach it a bunch of words, and we were able to get to a table where it knows what words are in relevance to other. We were able to train it to take notes of what these words are. We covered kind of those are vectors and dimensions and so on and so forth. And we talked about how we kind of bake in these words into the model, which is basically the weights. That is, we are trying to get to the weights, but table was just a simplified version to kind of explain that. Let's ask it a question. So we've trained it on the data and now it's supposed to answer, right? So let's say you ask a simple question as, how do I make scrambled eggs? Right? Now this is a question. Now after the training, the response it will give is that it will say, how do I make an omelette? And it says, how long do you boil an egg? And then it keeps on asking questions. The thing here is that we are expecting an answer, right? But for the model, it doesn't understand a question, an answer. There is two people in the conversation, right? As previously we discussed, it's just trying to finish sentences. Whatever came before it, this is the thing that is coming after it, right? Now, if that is the case, then the whole point of training doesn't make sense, right? We're trying to get an answer, we're trying to feed it enough data, and then we're trying to get an answer for any question that we might have. The reason that it's doing this is because when you're training it, let's take an example of the training data that was used. So here, if you take, this was the page that was used to train it, right? If you take a look, it says, how do I make scrambled eggs? How do I make omelette? So when it was trained that after this question, there's a bunch of questions that is coming, it'll keep filling it with questions, right? In the internet, let's say there is a forum where you ask questions, right? Maybe there's a drop down that you go into answers and stuff like that, but maybe just there are just questions. So it doesn't know what a question is, what an answer is, and to give a recipe instead of following it for following the question with another question, right? So this is where what we kind of do here is we want to point it to the recipe. Okay. Now for the same thing, this is the document it should point to. If you ask it a question, this is the document it's supposed to point to. Next, the same time when you ask, how do I make scrambled eggs? It was pointing to the page of questions, but it was supposed to point to a recipe, right? Now, when you train this, the next time it points to a recipe. So it doesn't mean that it did not know the answer. It knew the answer, it did not know which to point to, what followed after that, right? It did not understand that it was a question and it should be followed by a recipe and not another question. So this is where answer preferences, there are different ways to put it, but to just dumb it down, this is where answer preferences. Like, I don't want this question followed by another question. I want a recipe. Okay. Now, the whole time it knew how to make eggs, but it just did not know which to point to. Once you tell the preference and once you lock it in, this is basically what you're teaching it. You're teaching it a preference, right? And this is what post training does, right? So post training, we're trying to teach it that there are two people. There's a question, and this is a preferred way to complete it, right? So this is where we're baking that in. Now, there are two things that you do to do post training. The first thing is you have a question and you write down an answer. This is the answer I want, the entire recipe of how to make eggs, and then you give it to it. And the second thing you do it is you cannot do this at scale, right? So you basically automate it. You just say, instead of you asking a question and then me writing it and then giving you the answer, you give me two answers that you think might be the one, and I'll keep pointing to the one that is correct. So this way it's not only faster, but at scale, this is the only viable option that we can do, right? Now, let's take the same example. You have a question. Previously, it was answering as with another question. Now it will give you an answer because it points to a recipe. Now this we did it based on writing. The same thing if we have to do it with pointing, right? What we do is we say that just respond and give me two responses. So response A, it says that this is the response, and there is another response. Now you pick response B and you say that this is the way I want you to answer. So we're baking in preference here. So it knows the answers. We're just saying that I would like you to answer in this way, and this is what we are expecting out of it. Okay, this is where the question, the Q&A preference and what humans want is kind of baked in. Okay, now for example here, nobody wrote B. He's just trying to point whether it is this one or this one. So this is the first fix that we do. Right now, it assumes that it's the only one person in the room, right? We're trying to teach it that you're the one who's going to answer, and there's another person who's going to be asking the questions. But the way we kind of do this is that we're not trying to introduce another person into the room. We're trying to tell it that given the sequence, these are the next words that follow. But I would prefer that if you told me the answer, the next words in this way. So that is where we were pointing. Now, if you take a look at the meeting example that we took previously for optimal experience, what we kind of do is we set the brightness to a certain number, the volume to a certain number, the microphone to a certain number. Similarly, in post training, we set up the preferences in certain numbers. An example would be helpfulness. How helpful is this message? How cautious is it? How chatty is it? So this is where you feel like you're having a conversation in the post training, where this is where whatever you're expecting is being delivered, right? Now, instead of, maybe let's say you ask, when was the bridge built? It can maybe say, I'm not certain, but I think it was somewhere. But the only thing that we are looking is a year. So this is the preferred answer that we want, right? Now, let's just summarize post training along with pre training so that we kind of cover everything that is done, because next thing is inference. So we have the writer. This is the writer model. What it does is that you train it with data. You basically put a bunch of data in from the internet, and you teach it the grammar, the words, the tone, the caution, stuff, bunch of stuff. So these are the weights that is being baked in. This is the first part, where it knows what words mean in relevance to another. It is able to create a table of words, their vector, their meanings, their notes, and stuff like that. Then we introduce the judge. So the judge is another model. So instead of training on the whole bunch of words, we just train it on one specific thing. And for the different things that we kind of want to train it is, maybe let's say, for example, this is the answer I like, empathize over here, push back, and maybe don't over explain certain stuff, right? So these are the things that we kind of want to train the judge model. Okay, it's a smaller LLM, but what we're trying to do is, this is the only thing that we're trying to train it. We're going to give it only two things. We're not going to teach it words or anything. Given this, I would like this preference, right? So this is where all of the empathy, the warmth, and all of these things kind of is trained on. Now we have two. One is the writer. That is where it knows all the words, what come next, and all of those things. This is the judge. It says that once the writer gives an example, the judge will say which answer to pick based on those two ones. Now it will give you a score. It'll say that this is the preferred answer. So that is the feedback input for writer. And then the model's weights will change so that it understands preferences, right? So for example, let's say for example, it says, the writer says, this is option A, and it says this is option B. The judge will say that 82%, we want you to pick answer B, right? 82 is the score. Score is saying that this answer is preferred, right? And this goes back to the writer. So this keeps happening multiple numbers of times. The writer will pick, the judge will say which to change, and the weights of the writer will change. Because the thing that is changing here is that it's trying to adjust itself to find out, given the sequence, what is the next word and what is the preferred next word, right? There might be a bunch of next words. In multiple places, we use multiple things based on the context. But within the same context also, what is the preferred output that you would like? Is it an answer? Is it a recipe? Is it code? What is the thing that you're specifically? So that is the thing that gets trained here. But if you take a look here, the weights of the judge doesn't change, because it is something that is very temporary, that is built only for post training, and after that it doesn't get carried over. The only thing that gets carried over is the writer. So far we have the model, we have it to train on words, and once it knows the bunch of words, we train another model for judging, We tell it that this is the preferred answer we like, and then we basically ask them to interact with each other. We ask the writer to predict the next word, but to basically generate two different options, and the judge will tell you that this is the answer that is preferred, and then it learns from it. And this is why we need post training. This is where it makes the LLM feel more human like and more conversatory, right? That is where it becomes more conversational and more real. Okay. So post training is all about taking in preference into the model.